meeting you right where you are on your foster care journey. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Forgotten Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Cabe, and I am so happy to be with you. If you are part of the foster care community, passionate about serving, or simply interested in learning more, we are here for you. In every episode of this podcast, you're going to hear from men and women who've experienced foster care to one degree or another. They may have grown up in the system, are caseworkers or foster parents, or other people who are here to bring you hope and encouragement. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and share with a friend. Remember, you are not alone. I hope you enjoy the Forgotten Podcast. I'm very excited to get to talk with you. I'm excited to get to know you better. I love that you're a part of the family here at TFI. I think that's incredible, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we kind of jump into that, I want to hear about you and tell me about your family. Let's start there.
So I am married to my husband, Justin. We will be married for about 15 years,
Nice.
Almost, coming up here in the summer. And we have two kiddos. We have Maddox, who's 9, and we have Ava, who is 6.
Oh my goodness. So the grade school years.
Yeah. It's that middle age, and they're a lot of fun right now.
Yeah, that's a special
and
time.
Independent, so it's not as tiring.
Yes. That's a very special season. I just remember us saying when all of our kids were kind of in that grade school age range, there's just something really sweet. You're not running around chasing them after everything quite yet, and they can like put on their own clothes and they can do the things that,
Right.
You don't have to do everything for them. That's very cool. And I saw that you guys own and operate a Chik-fil-A.
We do. We're very new to
That
the Chik-fil-A
is so
world, but
cool.
It's been fun and hard at the same
I'm
time.
sure.
Yes.
Yeah, my 3 of my children work for Chick-fil-A here in my town.
Oh,
so
my
we're
goodness.
big fans.
I love it. That's awesome. Yeah, it's a great place to work. I actually, before we had Chick-fil-A, I'd never worked in a restaurant before, so it's a very new experience for us. And
yeah, that's amazing, and I know that their culture is huge and something that I'm sure you guys have experienced, and they're encouraging you to carry throughout the entire organization. I think and culture for us is so important too, but I love to listen to anything from Chick-fil-A. Like I just heard someone being interviewed from there, and I just respect that organization a whole lot. So I thought that was pretty cool.
They're a great company to work for
That
sure.
is awesome. Well, Jessie, tell me about what is it that motivates you, or what are you passionate about? What are things that make you want to get up in the morning?
Honestly, my biggest dreams have always been to become a wife, become a mom, invest in my family. And God's been really gracious to allow me to do those things. And so my family, honestly, is what is my biggest motivator every day, to be the best version of myself, and to set an example for my kids to follow. And so that's really my biggest thing, is just being wife, being mom. And then ultimately, I also just, I have that passion that God has instilled in me from a very young age, just in regards to adoption and fostering. TFI is the way that I'm living into that right now. So we can talk more about that and my journey to the point that I got to today.
Yeah.
But mostly just those roles as wife and mom are what drive me every day.
That's awesome. And tell me more about you said from little on up, you had something in you. Your heart was for adoption foster care. Why? Why do you think? Or what? Tell us about that.
So I was thinking about that the other day. I'm like, what was it that really sparked that interest in me? And I honestly can't pinpoint a certain point. I just remember from, middle school all the way up, I was just very fascinated with the idea of adoption, and it just always tugged at my heartstrings when I would hear people's stories of adoption. And I know Stephen Curtis Chapman was a pretty big Christian artist during those years, my junior high, senior high years. And, I just remember hearing his story a lot in the process of his family and their adopting of their 3 little girls from China. And he made a song called When Love Takes You In. And he had a music video to it. And I just remember, like, I would watch his music video over and over and just cry because it was just so good. And I was the teenager that, like, while other teenagers were looking up music videos on the internet, I would look up adoption stories because it just, it did something within me. And it was just such a deep passion. And I knew it was a desire of mine someday to be able to participate in that.
Wow, that's so cool. It's interesting because I can still hear you.
I can't hear
you. Oh,
you.
really? Can you hear me yet?
Oh, wait, there we go. Okay, I can hear you now. Something popped up, but then it just went away.
Cool. Okay. Well, we will pause for that. Sorry. No, you're good. Yeah, it's so interesting to me, Jessie, because you mentioned Stephen and Curtis Chapman. He and his wife, their story was a huge part of our story. In fact, I remember, so you were in junior high. I was a young mom. I remember Paige, my oldest, who's now 19, which is crazy to me, but she was a baby, and she was laying on our bed as I was doing laundry in our room, and I remember hearing their story of adoption on the radio, and I will never forget the pit that formed in my stomach as I thought, Lord, I hope you're not trying to tell me something. So for me, it was a fear. It wasn't something that I was like, I didn't have a passion or heart for it like you did. It scared me. But God used that as just one of the steps that from awareness to action. And since that time, we've adopted 5 children. We would have never knew that was going to be our journey, but so grateful it is. But yeah, he was a big part of us, and I can see that. I know the song, I know the video you're talking about, so I very much resonate with. God used him a lot, and just their journey of faithfulness. It was really just their journey of obedience to help other people understand.
Yeah, and I think for me too, like for you being an adult and already in that season of life of having children, I think, being more anxious about the idea of adoption makes a lot of sense. But as a kid, like when you're just in that stage of just dreaming and you don't always think through all the details of like the difficulties that, like all the challenges you're going to face if you actually live it out, it's more of just this dream. So I think for me, it definitely started out of like seeing all the positives in the process of adoption and not necessarily the hardships that it brings along with it. Yeah.
Oh, totally. Now, were you telling your parents? Were you the kid who was going, we need to do this as a family? Like, tell me about that.
Yeah. So I somehow discovered that you could search on the internet for kids that were waiting for homes, which was really dangerous for me. Because I would do it all the time, and I would scroll through these pictures and just, it was just killer because I was, not old enough to adopt myself at that point. And so I would take those pictures to my parents and be like, look at these kids. They need a home. Can we please adopt? Will you please consider adopting? And my family never did adopt, but it was always something I was interested in. And so when I was in high school, my mom encouraged me to attend classes at like a adoption agency, classes that would train and certify and license parents that were wanting to foster or adopt. And it was in those classes that I learned about fostering. Prior to that, it was, mostly adoption on my mind. But throughout those classes, obviously, I wasn't becoming licensed for anything. I was still too young, but it was more of just an educational experience for me. And it was there that I was introduced to fostering and the idea of foster care.
Wow. What a great suggestion from your mom. It's interesting, Jessie, because I feel like there's parallel things here. Again, as an adult, we had gotten involved with adoption, and then God changed our hearts over time of really through a lot of loss and things not working out the way we hoped that they would. But he opened our eyes to foster care. And when we went into those classes, that's when we also really began to understand what foster care was. It's about reuniting, being a part of this reunification of families, letting broken families be restored and just being a part of that. So it's just interesting how we were living kind of parallel, and obviously at that point you could not do anything about it, but what a cool thing for your mom to encourage you to do and for you to go and take advantage of that.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for her leading me in that way and encouraging
That
me.
is very cool. So let's move on to, as you did become an adult then, Jessie, like how did that passion continue forward and where did it lead you?
Yeah, so my husband and I became parents to our biological son when we were 5 years into marriage. Okay. And it was also during that time we went through licensing classes when our son was a baby, and we were placed with our first foster son when our biological son was 8 months old and our foster son was 9 months old.
Wow.
And yeah, so I think I went into that whole experience as a foster parent, not really with necessarily having certain expectations, but I think I was still just excited about the whole experience so much that I was looking more towards the positives and not really taking into consideration all the challenges as well. So that experience for me, if I'm being honest, was difficult. It was like we had twins. Yeah. And there was a lot of beauty in it, but a lot of hard. We had our foster son for several months. And after he left our home, we moved out of state to a new state. And so we haven't relicensed since moving. We've had other things, life circumstances, changes of jobs. My husband, before becoming a Chik-fil-a operator, was a pastor. Okay. And we didn't bring enough income in for me to stay home with my kids without me bringing some sort of income in as well. And so what I did was I found other children to watch out of our home so that I could still stay home and make enough money to be home. And with that, we ended up having my daughter as well. So we have 2 kiddos now, and then I watched 3 other kiddos out of our home. And I did transportation for school and everything too. So I pretty much filled our whole van up between our own kids and then the kids that I was watching. And so, my husband and I had talked about fostering again or adoption, but we didn't know how to make that happen with the space that we had in our lives and in my vehicle. And then moving ahead a few more years, my husband changed careers from pastor to Chick-fil-A world. And we're only 1 year into Chick-fil-A. Okay. And that last year has been very difficult and exhausting and stressful for our family. And so up to this point, we haven't relicensed for fostering. So yeah. And so for me, the passion and the desire to dive into that has always been there. And so TFI has given me a way to participate in that. It just looks a little different.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we dive in a little bit deeper to your experience with TFI and everything, when you guys were dating or before you got married, did you was this something that you and your boyfriend, fiance, husband was on board, or was this something that you had to kind of convince him of, or how did that look?
Yeah, I was very upfront because it's always been such a huge, deep desire of mine. I knew I wanted to be a mom. I wanted to have my own children biologically, but I also very much wanted to adopt or foster. And so I was very upfront with him from the get-go, and he understood that and was on board with that. And obviously we dove into fostering a little bit when we lived in Michigan. Today, I feel like just with starting Chick-fil-A and just having our 2 kids, they're both very strong, strong personalities. Whenever I bring up fostering and adopting now, my husband kind of looks at me and he's like, I'm okay with 2. And so I think his heart would be open to it once we kind of settle into a new routine, and rhythm in our new city and our new role with Chick-fil-A and everything. But our kids love them, but they're strong kids, and they can be a lot to handle sometimes, just the 2 of them. So.
Yes. Well, and you are in such a transitional season right now, to get your feet on the ground and not feel like you're kind of on a ship that's rocking. Will feel nice.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
and we're getting
there. And it will come. It will come. So tell me how you first heard about TFI.
Yeah, so it was probably about 8 years ago now. When we moved from Michigan to Iowa, we moved to the Quad City area, and my husband was on staff at the church there. And shortly after we moved there was a CAFO conference, Christian Alliance for Orphans, and it was being held in Chicago, so it wasn't too far from us. I remember that one. And I was able to go with some of the other church staff members and spouses and just other people in the church congregation that had a heartbeat for adoption and those types of things. And I met the worship pastor's wife, and we just obviously talked about our heartbeats. They were in the process of adopting from Haiti at the time. And so we were just talking, and I had mentioned fostering when we were in Michigan, and she's like, have you ever heard of the Forgotten Initiative? And I was like, no, not at all. And so she was the one to introduce me, and I checked it out, and I really fell in love with the podcast. And so for the past 8 years, it's just, it used to be me Googling adoption stories on the internet, but I just absolutely love the Forgotten podcast, and that's just been an ongoing voice in my head over the years. So
how cool. And now here you are on the Forgotten podcast. Did you think that would happen?
No, never, honestly, if I'm being honest.
Oh man, that's awesome. Okay, so you got to know the podcast, and hopefully we were an encouragement to you over those years. But then at some point you learned about the advocate role, and talk about when you first started to understand that there was more to our ministry than the podcast even.
Yeah. I honestly, I think I may have gotten on the website and just did some research, like digging deeper in. And it was a few years ago when I started becoming more familiar with the idea of the advocate role. And I started toying around then with the idea of what that might look like for me. And do I want to, jump into that and just kind of toy around with the idea of seeing what that might look like. And at that time, I had itty bitty kids, and I had the other kids in our home. And if I'm being quite honest, I've always struggled with feelings of inadequacy and just that I am not enough for positions in leadership like that. And so that's held me back a lot in life. And so I kind of let it go. I kind of let fear take hold of me in that moment. And it was probably a little bit of timing as well, and just feelings of overwhelm just with the season of life that I was in. But it was last September where I was getting the itch to dive into fostering again. And my husband was in the heat of some really stressful moments with the store. And I knew it was not a great time for us to dive into fostering again, but my heart was there so much, and I just wanted it so bad. And so I started processing again. I'm like, okay, well, if we can't foster through our home right now, like I have to do something. Like God has dug this so deep into my heart, and this desire to do something so deeply within me that I need to do something. And I just started to feel the nudge from the Holy Spirit, just over and over and over. And there were things on the radio that would play that would point me in the direction of doing something. And there were moments at church where the pastor would say something, and it just was this constant nudging. And then when I was listening to the podcast, you guys started talking about, applications starting to be opened in October. And I was like, oh no, I was like, is this what I'm like, kind of like you felt with the adoption part, like, God, is this year? Because I don't know how I feel about this. Like, it kind of scares me. Like, I'm not sure I want to do this. And then I heard Leah Johnson's podcast, your interview with her, and her story, it was so timely, and her story just resonated with me so much because she had that passion for adoption from a young age, and her story just didn't play out in the way that she had initially thought. And she mentioned something in her podcast where she said something like, God gives us this passion, but how we end up using it might not look the way that we had initially planned.
Yes, that's good.
And, she always talked around the idea of like, I always envisioned myself adopting, but at least I can do something still. And so when I heard her interview, I was like, oh my goodness, I think this is what God's calling me to do. And I went back and forth so many times, like, do I submit my application? Do I do it? And I did it. I said, okay, God, I'm, going to leave this in your hands, and I'm going to trust that you're going to take it where you want it to go. And this whole journey has been that way, just trusting that he's taking me step by step where I need to be. And here I am.
Here you are. Oh my goodness. Okay. So we're going to dive in a little bit deeper yet, but one, I totally understand the feelings of inadequacy. I think that is Satan. He loves to isolate us. He loves to make us feel like we aren't enough. The insecurity, it's real. And I face that. I think most of us, if we're being honest, feel that, right? Even though, and so I just think it's just, one, I appreciate you just sharing that, because I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people. And also bring it out into the light, because that is what the enemy wants. He wants us to say, you could never. Recently, my pastor said something about Satan will tell us, even as Christians, like, that's not that bad, right? Talking about when we sin, that's not that bad. But then when we step into sin, then Satan reverses it and says, that's so bad, you can never tell anybody. And that's just the way he works, is he wants to isolate us. And so I love that you pushed back against that, and God gave you the grace to say, you know what, I'm going to step forward. And that's awesome. And so just for those who are listening, if you don't know what the advocate role is, if you haven't been a long-time listener here, you've probably not heard of the advocate role. And that is really a volunteer ministry leader who is launching a foster care ministry right where they live. And the whole role is to connect the church to the foster care community. We want to help God's people be the hands and feet of Jesus and help meet physical needs, relational needs, and spiritual needs. And when we do that, we believe that people, all of us together, will experience more of Jesus. So that's what we're here to do, and that's what we do at TFI, is help people launch and lead thriving foster care ministries. So, Jessie, when you reached out, what was the experience like for you? How has the process been?
Yeah, so the application process, I don't remember where I heard it. One of you mentioned it at some point. I think that, it's just as much an interview process for TFI interviewing me as it is, or the application process to get to know me, as it is for me to get to know TFI, and if we're a good fit for one another. And that helped me feel very much at ease in the process, because it wasn't like submitting my application wasn't a done deal. Like, I'm committing. It was a process. And along the way, I got to learn more about TFI and just the core values and the culture and the mission and vision. And I got to see, does my heart align with this? Are we able to link arms and stand side by side and agree? And so it was a process for both of us, for you guys to learn about me and for me to learn about you. And just every interaction that I had along the way was met with just such grace and just a gentleness. And it's just so evident just how deep TFI's love for Jesus goes. And there's just such comfort in that. So the process really was enjoyable. The whole time I was, of course, nervous because the whole time I was still processing and fighting those feelings like, am I really able to do this? Am I good enough for this? But you guys are just so encouraging, and I just trusted that God would open the doors where they needed to be opened.
That's super encouraging for me to hear. I appreciate you sharing that. And I will say we care about people. We really do. And that love comes from our deep love for Jesus. You're right. And we care about culture. I often like to think of our culture, like I kind of view it like a culture triangle. And this is kind of the alignment sort of piece, is TFI isn't the only way or like the right way or even the best way. It's just our way. And so we just want to make sure, just like you're saying, that we're all a fit for each other. Because you have this culture triangle that at the base is the beliefs, the foundations. Are we aligned at the base level? That's most important. But then as we go up the triangle, are we also aligned? Do we all want to see people everywhere supporting the foster care community and experiencing Jesus together? Do we share the same vision and mission? Do we all care about getting the church engaged with the foster care community? Do we pour into our agencies? Is that our model, the way we do things, right? Are we aligned around that? And then our core values, do we honor God, grow through service, communicate and celebrate? Like, are those things important to all of us? And what's neat is culture drives behavior. And so if we do align, then it's just going to work. Sometimes I think about it like if you're on a road trip. Our family, we're gearing up in a couple weeks to go to Florida. And it takes about 20 hours to get there. And we have 10 people in the car. You know, it can be, there can be some disagreement and some things. But I often think, like, if my husband Clint said, we're going to Florida and we're all aligned around the idea of going to Florida, but then he takes us to California, there's going to be tension and there's going to be frustration. Is California worse than Florida? Not necessarily. It's just different than we expected. Or if I'm in there going, you need to take this interstate instead of that interstate, and I'm not aligned around his way of driving us there, again, we're going to be frustrated. And so for us, we've just really learned, again, TFI isn't the only way, but we do need to make sure we're all a fit for each other so that we can do this work as best as possible.
Yeah.
And did you learn about the culture triangle and all of those things in your training?
I did actually, yes. I was actually considering bringing that up in the
Really?
conversation, but you already did.
Good.
So, yeah, because that's something that I've noticed throughout the whole process too, is just how deep you guys dive into culture, and you really it's interwoven in everything you do. The mission is stated over and over and over, and I love that because it really ingrains it into people's hearts and minds to remind them like why we're doing this. Like another thing that you mentioned in one of your training videos was the whole idea of know your why, know your way. And it's just, you guys are so true to your why, and it's just so evident how important that is to you, and it's comforting to me because I know that you guys don't take this lightly, that it's a very serious thing, and you guys are committed. And so it brings a lot of comfort and excitement because it's something I can get behind.
Awesome. I love to hear that. That's super encouraging. What else has been kind of a maybe eye-opening or just something that you did not expect in this process so far?
So, I mean, I think I already mentioned, but your staff is just amazing. There's just such a gentleness about them, and they just gently lead you in conversation to feel encouraged and empowered to live into what we're trying to do. And they're just so gracious in the moments when I have expressed feelings of uncertainty or questioning and not knowing how to approach certain circumstances, they always come back with suggestions. And I think that's what I've really appreciated about TFI as a whole is, for someone who has a desire to reach the foster care community in their area, they just might not know how to go about it or have the tools to do it. They don't know where to start. And, this is something that TFI does. And you guys have done it for a while, and so you have this foundation for people to start on, and you walk with your advocates, and you're never alone in it. You know that you have this built-in community of people that you're doing this with, and just knowing that you have people backing you up, or that you can bounce ideas off of, is just so helpful and comforting. And I just honestly was truly amazed just at the things that you guys do with such great excellence. I've been very impressed throughout the whole process, and just the resources that you provide your advocates as well. I knew that you offered these things at one point, but I guess it took me by surprise when I finally got to that process and realized oh yeah, we handle all of your financials, and we already, created a website for you, and here's Quinn, he can do all the graphic designs that you need. And anything that you could think of or need, you guys are already on top of it. You're already doing it. You're already providing the help. And we simply just get to be the feet on the ground. And that's huge. It's so helpful. And it makes a difference for sure.
That's huge. That's hugely encouraging. Like I said, I feel like I am so proud of our team. I couldn't ask for a better team. I'm so grateful for the people God has brought around us, around me, and, but I just think often, I'm an initiator and a starter. If I didn't have these people, we wouldn't still be here, because God has brought the people to build systems, to think differently, to make sure we're being sustainable, to live out the vision. And then he brings all of you advocates to be exactly what you said, the feet on the ground, and carry this vision even further. We can't do it individually. We need each other, right? You need our help, and we need your help, for this vision to be recognized. And so it is just an absolute privilege to serve with you, to serve with my national team here. And I love when hearing people talk about the team, because I know how great they are. But to hear it from you is really, I feel like a proud mama.
You should be. They are awesome.
Yeah, they really are. That's awesome. Well, so now you're in a training season with us, right? So what has that been? You've been in a training. Actually, pause for 1 minute. This is terrible, but when do you launch? Or did you just launch? Are you launching up in April?
No, it's okay. So that is the hope.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
We're in month 3. March is month 3. And then it's a hopeful launch for April.
Okay, great, good. I thought I had that right, but then all of a sudden I second guessed myself. Okay. Yeah. So Jessie, you are in the training cohort right now, and you will be. And actually, pause a second too. I'm not sure when this one airs, because I don't know if this is. Well, I'll just say as we speak, because then even if. Okay. So Jessie, as we speak here and record this podcast, you are in training right now with us. And you're it's not just you, it's you with a bunch of other leaders. We have cohorts now so how has that been meeting and kind of doing this training with other people? Because this cohort model is relatively new for us.
Okay. I just assumed that it was something the way that you guys always did it.
There's been so much learning and growing over the years. I think you're just the second or third cohort we've ever had. So
yeah, so the training process, there's really, there's a couple parts to it. So there's the one-on-one coaching, which I've really appreciated. That one-on-one time with Holly has been really great. And it gives you an opportunity to really ask some questions and get help in certain areas. But the cohorts and the time together where you come together with the other people that are training for advocate roles, it's it's just encouraging, because when you hear the stories that they're walking through and the challenges that they're faced with, you just know you're not alone, and that your story is just part of a bigger picture, and other people are, facing similar situations as you try to get into the agencies, as you try to meet with an agency worker and what that looks like. And it's helpful, I think, and it's important, because others have easier times than others, and others have more difficulties getting into their agencies and a little bit more pushback. And I think it's good, because then you're able to encourage one another on and spur one another on, and it just builds momentum, and so that you don't slink back. If you're on your own and you're facing these challenges, it's easy to kind of coil back and not push forward. But when you have people behind you fighting for you and praying for you and championing you on, it's a lot easier to keep pushing in.
Man, I love it. That is awesome. Jessie, I don't want to take too much of your time, but is there any final things you want to share with our listeners, maybe outreach to them or whatever, just anything final on your heart that we haven't talked through?
Yeah, so I mentioned this earlier, but one of the things that I've always struggled with personally is just the feelings of inadequacy. I think one of the ways that the enemy likes to work is he tosses lies our way, and he waits to see which ones are going to stick. And the ones that stick are the ones that he keeps hurling our way. And if we're not careful, those lies can become a soundtrack in the back of our mind that we play over and over, and we start to believe in it. And it does hold us back. And if I'm being honest, when I was asked to do this podcast, one of my first initial thoughts was, why me? Why me? There's so many other people out there that could probably do a much better job. And it was lying in bed last night that the Holy Spirit whispered, because people need to hear your story, and they need to know that they can do it too. And one of the things that, when my husband was pastoring, and one of the main points in one of his sermons that has really stuck with me for a really long time, is having God confidence. And the idea that, when I'm lacking self-confidence, to have God confidence, because it's in the things that we don't feel like we're good enough for, where God shows up, and then he gets all the glory for it. I love the story of Gideon, when the Midianites are really pressing in on the Israelite people, and they start crying out to God, and God hears their cries, and he's getting ready to rise up Gideon to defend his people. And the angel of the Lord comes to Gideon, and he addresses Gideon as mighty warrior. He claims it over Gideon's life before he's even ever fought a battle, right? And Gideon's kind of like, what? Who, me? Like, mighty warrior? He's like, my clan is the weakest one in Israel, and I'm the weakest one in my family. Why would you pick me? But he chooses to live into it. He chooses to do it afraid. I don't know where this quote came up, but the whole courage is doing it scared or doing it afraid.
Totally.
And I feel like this whole process for me has been just straight up courage. I've been afraid this whole process, but I'm choosing to do it anyway. And I feel like there's someone out there, probably multiple people out there, that are feeling the same nudge of the Holy Spirit that I did when I heard about applications opening up. And they're feeling that nudge, and they're afraid. And they're saying, who, me? Why me? There's so many other people out there that could do a much better job than I could. And I would just encourage them to just trust the Holy Spirit to open the doors or close the doors, and trust the process, because it's in those moments when God gets the glory. With Gideon's story too, he started with 22,000 warriors, and God said, no, that's too many, and took it down to 10,000. And God's like, no, that's still too many people. and brought Gideon's army down to only 300 men. And the reason why is because God was like, if I allowed those 10,000 or those 22,000 to fight, then the Israelites would have came back and said, look what we did in our own strength. We rescued ourselves. But God was like, no, this is my story. I'm going to be the one to get the glory. And he took them down to 300 and created an impossible situation so that he could get the glory. And I feel like that's what I've been fighting for in my own story, is just I completely feel inadequate or just not, equipped in the way others are equipped. But the beauty of it is that God gets the glory for it. It's not me, it's him through me. And so I would just encourage those listening that if there's feelings of anxiety, hand those over to the Lord, and don't silence the nudging of the Holy Spirit.
Wow, Jessie. Yeah, God is shining through you. And although you might feel inadequate or weak, or you are a strong woman of God, and it comes through.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I've heard it said, our limitation is God's opportunity. And that's exactly kind of what you're saying. And we're here to make Jesus more famous, right? And so thank you for being on. Thank you for continuing to courageously step forward. I pray that you'll be immensely blessed for that, and that you will just continue to see. You're building muscle is what you're doing, Jessie. You're building muscle, and you're growing stronger, even though you might not feel like it. You're going to look back and go, wow, I've come further than I expected. So thank you for being on. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for being part of our TFI family. I cannot wait to see what else God does through you and in you.
Thank you so much for having me. I truly was honored to be a part of this.
Well, I hope today's episode was an encouragement to you wherever you are on this foster care journey. Now, we want you to stay connected, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Also, we have a ton of great content for you over at theforgotteninitiative.org. Thank you for watching, and I can't wait to see you next time.